Hi, this is Ben Hart for BitcoinInstitute.net. I'm going to talk to you today about what Bitcoin is and how it works. Bitcoin was first launched in 2009 and is the first successful digital money. It allows people to send money securely over the internet. Bitcoin was created by an anonymous computer scientist who went by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto on the Bitcoin forums. In 2008, Satoshi published his 8-page white paper outlining the Bitcoin protocol and the mechanics of how it would work. My belief is that Satoshi is not one person, but is a collection of software engineers who had been working together on this project for many years. Not knowing who Satoshi is or was is one of the world's most intriguing mysteries. Bitcoin was officially launched on January 3, 2009, with the mining of the first block, the Genesis block, Block 0. There were no transactions in the Genesis block. It was just an empty container. In fact, there were no money transactions contained in any Bitcoin block until block number 70, when software developer Hal Finney received 10 Bitcoins from Satoshi as a gift. The first use of Bitcoin to buy an actual product happened on May 22, 2010. A computer programmer from Florida named Laszlo Hanyecz bought 2 Papa John's pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoins. Hanyecz did not actually buy the pizzas directly from Papa John's. He posted a request on the BitcoinTalk.org forum. His post said, quote, "I'll pay 10,000 Bitcoins for a couple of pizzas, like maybe 2 large ones." A 19-year-old software engineering student from California named Jeremy Sturdivant answered Hanyecz by having Papa John's deliver the pizzas to Hanyecz. On that day, the value of 1 Bitcoin was established as 1/3 of 1 penny. Today, it will cost you about $20,000 to buy 1 Bitcoin. Unfortunately for Sturdivant, he quickly spent the 10,000 Bitcoins that he received for the 2 pizzas. Meanwhile, Hanyecz says he mined and spent approximately 100,000 Bitcoins in the early days of Bitcoin. Hanyecz and Sturdivant say they have no regrets. "I think it's great that I got to be part of the early history of Bitcoin in that way," Hanyecz told the Cointelegraph in 2018. "I like to think that what I did helped." Today, Bitcoin continues to be by far the largest cryptocurrency. It has a market cap or a market value of about $400 billion and has 180 million users. Quick promotional message. If you like this content, please hit the like, subscribe, and notification buttons. Share this video with some friends. And grab a copy of my book on Bitcoin over on Amazon. Also, follow me on Twitter. You'll find links to all of this below. All right, back to the content. Now, the number 2 crypto asset is called Ethereum. It's about half the size of Bitcoin. Ethereum is not actually a cryptocurrency, though it does have a currency called ETH as part of its ecosystem. Ethereum is trying to be a decentralized internet for decentralized applications. So Ethereum is not really a competitor to Bitcoin. Bitcoin has just one mission: to be honest, incorruptible digital money. After number 1 Bitcoin and after number 2 Ethereum, all the other cryptocurrencies are tiny by comparison. Bitcoin was designed to be completely decentralized. What does decentralized mean? And why is that important? Decentralized means that Bitcoin is not owned or controlled by anyone or any small group of people. It's not controlled by a government or a corporation. Instead, Bitcoin is a synchronized ledger of transactions distributed across more than 1 million computers or nodes around the world. This ledger is secured by blockchain technology and military-grade SHA-256 cryptography. The ledger history of transactions can never be changed. New blocks of transactions can be added to the blockchain ledger, but blocks cannot be changed or edited once they're part of the verified blockchain. No one runs Bitcoin. Bitcoin is run by open-source Bitcoin software and operates in strict adherence to a fixed set of protocols and rules. The most important rule of Bitcoin is that it has a fixed supply. There will never be more than 21 million Bitcoins. This is in contrast to the government's money printing press. The U.S. government creates trillions of new dollars every year and dumps them onto the economy. This devalues the money that you have earned. It's counterfeiting, which is a form of theft. Up until 1971, the value of the dollar was pegged to gold. 1 ounce of gold was $35 in 1971. Then President Richard Nixon and Congress took us off the gold standard. Since the United States abandoned the gold standard in 1971, the price of 1 ounce of gold went from $35 to around $1,700 today. In other words, the US dollar has lost about 98% of its value since 1971, when measured against gold. Why did our government take us off the gold standard? Well, the simple answer is politicians wanted more money to grow the government, but didn't want to go to the trouble of increasing taxes, which is never politically popular. It's much easier just to print money, which produces an unlegislated tax called inflation. The inflation rate is now running at about 8% per year, but it's actually worse than this because the government keeps changing the way it measures inflation. If the government were still measuring inflation the same way it was in 1980, the true inflation rate would be about 5% higher than the official inflation rate that is reported now. And I have an entire video on how the US money system has been deeply corrupted, and why this corruption of the money is the source of most of America's and the world's economic problems. When the United States abandoned the gold standard completely in 1971, the United States became a 100% fiat money printing system. Instead of gold, the US dollar would be supposedly backed by the full faith and credit of the US government. Now, how much faith do you have in the US government, or any government? If you're like me, I assume not much. This is the problem Bitcoin was designed to fix, the problem of dishonest money. The two big problems that Bitcoin was trying to solve was, number one, the double spending problem, which is the counterfeiting, which is the money printing. And two, removing humans from controlling the money, because humans are prone to corruption and greed. So how did Satoshi address these two problems? Well, he fixed the double spend problem, that is the counterfeiting problem, by using SHA-256 cryptography. SHA-256 was developed by the National Security Agency to protect our military's computer network. SHA stands for Secure Hash Algorithm. It's considered unbreakable code. To start using Bitcoin, you need your keys, which come in pairs, your private key and your public key. The way you get your keys is to download a Bitcoin wallet. I use Electrum. I also have cold storage hardware wallets. These are wallets that are not connected to the internet, so are more secure. And I'll talk more about wallets later. Your wallet will help you generate your Bitcoin keys. You can share your public key. Your public key address is where people send you money. You can publish your public key on your website. Your public key is like a slot in a vault that can only go in one direction. People can put money in, but nobody can take money out without the private key. You need to keep your private key secret and hidden in a secure location. Anyone who has your private key can spend and take your Bitcoin. Your private key and public key are cryptographically linked, but in such a way that nobody can guess or see your private key code. But here's the next critical part. The SHA-256 algorithm generates a unique code for each transaction. The digital signature forms a link between your private key and the public key of whoever you are trying to send money to, but in such a way that no one can see or guess your private key code, because your private key code is cryptographically protected. It's hidden. And your digital signature is also unique for each transaction. This is in contrast to the physical world. In the physical world, agreements and documents are authenticated with your signature, perhaps in front of a notary. The problem is you only have one signature in the physical world that can be found on many documents and transactions. So your signature can be forged, which is why notaries, lawyers, and courts are needed to be involved in authenticating large transactions. A large transaction in the physical world, in the banking world, is a cumbersome process. But in Bitcoin world, each transaction requires a unique digital signature that is generated by SHA-256. This digital signature is tied to your private key and authenticates that you have the money to spend. For the sake of simplicity, I'm leaving a lot out here. But for a deeper dive into how this technology works, just Google terms like SHA-256, elliptic curve digital signature algorithm, and mathematical trapdoor. Also, in the Bitcoin system, there really is no such thing as a Bitcoin. Bitcoin is just a ledger or a list of transactions. Each transaction is linked to another transaction. And there's no central authority who needs to authenticate your identity or approve your transactions. All of this is accomplished automatically with the Bitcoin software, which incorporates SHA-256 cryptography and blockchain technology. The software tracks how much money that you have to spend by tracking inputs and outputs from your address. You can also spend fractions of a Bitcoin, called Satoshis. It takes 100 million Satoshis to equal 1 Bitcoin. So you don't have to worry that 1 Bitcoin costs $20,000 to buy. You can just buy small fractions of a Bitcoin. But how did Satoshi, or this group of software engineers, prevent humans from tinkering with Bitcoin software? And how did Satoshi design a system that prevents people from tinkering with a ledger or issuing a fraudulent ledger? When you are holding a $10 bill in your hand, this is what's called a bearer asset. No one can tinker with your $10 bill while you're holding it. If you're holding it, that's your $10 bill. Or if you're holding a gold coin, that's a bearer asset. But ledgers are prone to manipulation. A friend of mine had more than $500,000 stolen by a bookkeeper at his company, who was able to cook the books. Banks and big corporations are constantly conducting audits and have entire accounting divisions and redundant processes to make sure that no one is stealing money and cooking the books. Think about Enron. Remember the Enron scandal? Enron was a publicly traded corporation that had achieved a market cap of $60 billion by essentially creating a fake product and then showing fake profits by offloading its debt onto shell companies that it had created offshore. The problem Bitcoin fixed was removing the human element. No one person and no small group of people are in sole possession of the ledger. Instead, the Bitcoin software distributes an updated, synchronized copy of the ledger about every 10 minutes to a worldwide network of more than 1 million nodes and mining computers. If someone was trying to distribute a version of the ledger that is not identical to the ledger that everyone else has, well, that ledger would be kicked out of the system as bogus. Transactions can also be watched live and in real time as they occur. Everything is public. Everything is transparent. Only the names of the transactors are hidden. Instead of names, we see numbers for the identities of the transactors. And of course, we don't know what the transactions are for. But every other element of the transaction is public. And everyone can audit the history of transactions back to the very first transaction. In fact, all the way back to the Genesis block. Transparency is what allows Bitcoin to be truly decentralized. If the ledger is public, and if an updated synchronized ledger is distributed in public view to more than 1 million miners and nodes around the world, this makes it very difficult for fraud to take place. So if my friend's bookkeeper, who stole all that money, had 1 million people looking over her shoulder as she entered transactions for that day, it would have been very difficult for her to steal $500,000. So one way Bitcoin prevents fraud is with transparency, with more than 1 million nodes and miners looking at the same ledger as it's updated with live transactions in real time. And if one node has a version of the ledger that is different from everyone else's, it's kicked out as not valid. This decentralized structure allows Bitcoin to operate without a central administrator. Central administrations always become corrupt because humans are prone to corruption. Bitcoin's mission was to separate money from the government and to remove humans from the governance of the money. To do this, Bitcoin found a way to automate the money system. Bitcoin is governed by math and automated algorithms, not by people. Also in Bitcoin world, you are your own bank. Transactions are peer-to-peer. What does peer-to-peer mean? Well, peer-to-peer means that there's no middleman, no intermediary between you and who you are transacting with. An analogy would be shaking hands with someone. If you want to shake hands with someone, you just walk up and shake hands. There's no intermediary or third person shaking hands for you. The same if you're paying with cash. Cash payments are peer-to-peer. There's no middleman, like a Visa, or like your bank, or like PayPal. There are transaction fees with Bitcoin, but they're much less than what Visa, MasterCard, and the credit card companies charge. Most importantly, with Bitcoin, no one can freeze your account. No one can stop your transactions. No one can seize your money because Bitcoin has no central administration approving or potentially blocking transactions. Bitcoin is just a synchronized ledger of transactions that's distributed every 10 minutes to a worldwide network of computers. No one can interfere with it. The transactors cannot be identified. The transactions are just numbers flashing by on a screen. This is in stark contrast to the government's fiat money system. If you have money in a bank account, the IRS can easily seize your money. Or if you get into a civil lawsuit, a judge can freeze your money. If you are a small business and you are relying on Visa, MasterCard, or a payment processor like PayPal to process transactions, your business can be shut down at any time by these companies. This is happening with the National Rifle Association and gun manufacturers. Banks, credit card companies, and payment processors like PayPal are refusing to allow the NRA and gun manufacturers use their payment systems, even though gun ownership is a Second Amendment constitutional right. This can't happen in the Bitcoin system. Bitcoin is uncensorable, unconfiscatable money. We say uncensorable because money transactions are a form of communication. You are communicating value, you are sending value over the internet. With Bitcoin, no one can stop or intercept your transactions. Your transactions don't go through a human-controlled payment processor, so no one can stop your payments, and no one can stop you from getting paid. Your money is unconfiscatable because there's no headquarters to send a court order to. There's no central administration for the IRS to contact. There's no one in charge of the system for the government to arrest. There's no headquarters to raid or bomb. Bitcoin is just a distributed ledger in cyberspace. If the government were to try to destroy Bitcoin, the government would need to destroy every computer on the worldwide network and every offline cold storage hard drive. If there is just one copy of the Bitcoin ledger somewhere on Earth, Bitcoin still exists, and the network would grow back and reconstitute itself. Bitcoin is the only cryptocurrency or crypto asset that has been able to achieve true decentralization. True decentralization is what makes Bitcoin so resistant to attack by government, because no one owns or controls Bitcoin. So there's no one for the government to go and get. But what is blockchain? And how are blocks of transactions secured? Well, blocks of transactions are linked together by cryptographic hashes generated by the SHA-256 algorithm. A hash is code that allows information or data to flow in only one direction. So new blocks can be added to the blockchain, but blocks cannot be undone once they're added to the chain because of the hash linking the blocks. A hash is a one-way street. So let me show you how that works. Okay, to give you a basic overview of how blockchain and SHA-256 works, let's take a look at this awesome demonstration tool created by computer engineer Anders Brownworth. Now see this field here? This is a hash code that's generated by SHA-256 that represents perfectly the data that's in this box, which right now is no data. But even no data is represented by this long code right here. Now, if I change the data in this box, let's just say type my name, you'll see how radically this number changes. And if I put a period, look at this. If I put a period, look how radically that number changes. So that code represents the data in this box. It's a kind of fingerprint of the information in this box. And I can put as much data as I want in here. Now I can put the entire Library of Congress in here. I can put every book in the world in here. And this code right here is going to be the exact same length, 64 characters. Now this is an alphanumeric representation of SHA-256. So this could be represented as 256 bits of information, ones and zeros, binary numbers. So this is a representation of the SHA-256 code in alphanumeric form. Again, if I change the information that's in there, look at that. Look at those numbers changing, the hashing number. Now, I cannot find out what's in this box. I cannot find out the information that's in this box from looking at this code. But This information, then, lowercase b, will always produce that code. Now, if I put a period in, the code changes radically. But if I take the period off and go back to the way it was, the code is exactly the same. Let's do it again. Period. Radical change in code. Go back to the way it was. Code is the same. So this code is like a fingerprint. It's like the DNA of the information that's in that data field. And we cannot re-engineer this number here, this code, to figure out what's in this box. It's kind of like if you were to feed a cow through a meat grinder, hamburger meat would come out the other side. It would be the exact same material, the same number of atoms and molecules and so forth. But if you were to take that hamburger meat and feed it back through the meat grinder in reverse fashion, you would not come out with a cow on the other end. It would be impossible to reassemble the cow, unless you're God. So that's what this SHA-256 hashing function does. It assembles the data that's in this box in a form that cannot be reassembled to reproduce this data. But as long as we have this data here, we can reproduce that hash number. It's been said that there are more possibilities for this code right here than there are atoms in the known universe. So the number of possibilities are just mind-bendingly, astronomically enormous. That's why this is considered unbreakable code. Okay, let's now extend this idea of a hash and look at a block. Now, as you can see, a block here has more information in it. You've got block number 1. You've got another number here called a nonce. We'll get to what a nonce is in a minute. Then we have more data that can go in here. And we have the hash, which represents in code fashion the data that's in that block. And if we change the data that's in that block, it becomes invalid, or it becomes a block that has to be remined. And notice these zeros here. And even though there's no data actually now in this block, actually there is data. There's data here, the nonce number, and there's block number 1. So there is actually data, just no data in the data field. These 4 zeros here at the front of the hash tell the network that this is a block that's been signed off on. Now, mining is like a sign off on the content of the block by the miner. See this mine button here. Now, let's change the data in this block. Let's just put my name in there. And now the block is not valid, or it hasn't been signed off on by the miner. So now the miner has to go here and press the mine button. Now what this mining does is it guesses the proper number here that is linked to this number here. And the way that the network knows that you've guessed the proper number that you've signed off on this block is there's the right number of zeros here. So now I could spend a lot of time trying to guess this number myself, but I wouldn't be able to. It would take me months and months because the correct number here was 72,782, which is actually a very easy number for a computer. The difficulty of the number is set very low so that we can do this demonstration, so that Anders Brownworth allows us to do this demonstration. But if we change the data in this block a little bit, I add a period. This is no longer valid down here. The block has been broken. Then I have to hit the mine button to guess the right number. And you'll see this number up here changing. It's going to take a minute here so they guess. So the new number now, the new nonce, is 93,170. And again, we have the correct number of zeros here that tells the network that I have guessed the correct number, and the block is now signed off on by me, the miner. Now this system is called proof of work mining. It's a system designed to prevent spam and denial of service attacks on computer networks. This is a type of attack in which the attacker bombards a computer network with gazillions of fake transactions to freeze the network. An analogy would be a large crowd standing in front of a store, preventing real customers from entering the store. That's a denial of service or spam attack, which is the most common type of attack on a computer network. What this proof of work mining system does is to disproportionately increase the cost of attacking the computer network to the attacker. With this proof of mining function, it requires more computing power to attack the network successfully than it does for the computer network to see if the attacker has performed this number guessing function and solved the puzzle as the price of gaining admission to the network. And the network knows your computer has guessed the right number because there's a correct number of zeros at the front of the hash. And actually, it just has to be fewer than a certain number of zeros for the network to know that you've guessed the right nonce number, which stands for a number that can only be used once. The more zeros at the front of the hash, the more difficult the number is to guess. It has to do with shooting for a smaller and smaller target. The more difficult the number, the smaller the target the computer has to shoot for. Lots of zeros at the start of the number means a smaller number and a smaller target. And this gets pretty arcane and is beyond the scope of this video. But this proof of work mining function is how the balance of power is tipped against the attacker. It becomes cheaper to defend the network than to attack the network with this proof of work number guessing system called mining. Again, it's easy to check if the number has been guessed correctly simply by checking that there are the correct number of zeros at the front of the hash. Now, the difficulty of this number for this demonstration is very low. My laptop computer can guess it in a few seconds or in a few minutes. But the difficulty of this number that must be guessed to have access to a network can be increased infinitely. Okay, so now we have an idea of what a block is. So what is a blockchain? And how do we link these blocks of data together? So let's head on over here to Anders' blockchain demo tool. Now, as you can see here, these blocks contain some more information. There's the block number, block number 1, block number 2, and so forth. Then there's this nonce, the number you can only use once. Then you have the data field. Then you have the hash down here, hash here. And then you have something called previous. So this is the hash of the previous block. Now, the hash of the previous block is what links the blocks together. So what happens if I change the information in this block over here, put a 1 there? Well, you can see that block is broken. So what I have to do now is mine that block, and that's the most recent block. So it's mining. Okay, so now it's guessed the correct number here. We've got the correct number of zeros, and the entire ledger is still intact. You see green here. But what happens if I change some of the information back into this block, into an earlier block? Well, what happens is that both these blocks are not valid. So then what happens if I try to mine this block, this lead block here? Block number 5. Well, that block is now okay, but it's no good because this block back here is broken. So let's try to mine that block. Okay. So when I try to mine that block, this block is now broken. So now I can remine that block and fix the blockchain. Now this is a very low power blockchain here, just for demonstration. What if I change the data in the block back here? Okay, so all these blocks are broken. So again, if I try to mine a block here, the lead block, all these blocks back here are still broken. And if I try to mine them out of order, it doesn't work. All the blocks are still broken. So the only way I can fix this blockchain is to redo all of the work starting at the block that is broken farthest back in the blockchain. Previous blocks before the break are still valid, but I would have to redo all of the work starting with the broken block. That's the only way I can fix the blockchain. I'd have to redo all of the work, which can take a lot of time. And then the network, if I'm creating a fraudulent chain, the network would spot this. Okay? So that's kind of cool. The hash here in the for the previous block in this field must match this hash, and the hash here must always point to the hash of the previous block. So we can always link each block in succession. So this hash, this number here for the previous block must match the hash. This previous block, this hash for the previous block must match this hash, and so forth. And if I break the blockchain in any way, put in some different information here, all of this is broken. And the only way I can fix it is to just redo it all, which takes a lot of time and a lot of cost. And that's a big part of the security structure in blockchain. Ledgers are supposed to be very difficult to change. All right. Now, let's go to a distributed ledger. Kind of get the idea there. Let's go to a distributed ledger. Now we have several blockchains, and they're all identical, right? They're all these different blockchains. You got person A, or peer B, peer C. So we have 3 copies of the ledger here, 3 copies, and they're all identical, and they're being distributed in the blockchain. In Bitcoin world, they're being distributed about every 10 minutes, a copy of the same ledger. Now, what happens if somebody tries to distribute a ledger that does not match everybody else's? Let's say we put in some information here that's a little bit different from everybody else. So as you can see, the software picks up on the bogus chain. So that's basically how it works. You've got more than 1 million mining computers out there that are receiving a copy of the ledger every 10 minutes approximately. And if someone tries to distribute a copy of the ledger that doesn't match the ledger that everybody else has, it's assumed to be bogus. Just remember, you can only add blocks to the blockchain. Once the blocks are inserted into the blockchain, they can't be changed. Or it's very difficult to change them because you have to redo all of the work. The farther back you go in the chronology of blocks, the more difficult it would be to produce a fraudulent chain, because it would take a long time to have to redo all of this ledger, especially because this ledger in Bitcoin world is being distributed to more than 1 million miners and nodes on the network. And so it would become immediately obvious if somebody was trying to redo all of this on the blockchain. Now, what happens with Bitcoin is this worldwide network of more than 1 million mining computers are racing to guess this number here, this nonce. And this is a race that takes place about every 10 minutes. And the winning mining computer receives a block mining reward of 6.25 Bitcoins plus transaction fees. So that's a lot of money. So in the Bitcoin network, the difficulty of this nonce number to guess is astronomically high. And the race to guess this number by the worldwide network of miners is very intense, because there's a lot of money at stake for the winning miner every 10 minutes. And more on this race by miners in a moment, and why this is a key pillar of Bitcoin security. Okay, now let's take a look at the same idea by going to an actual ledger. This is also on Anders Brownworth blockchain demo tool, which is a lot of fun to play around with. Now, it's the same idea here, but now we have information in the form of a ledger. And if you try to change the ledger, then the block is broken. And in Bitcoin world, everybody on the network, 1 million computers, more than 1 million computers, have an identical copy of the ledger distributed every 10 minutes. And so the network would immediately spot this ledger as not valid. And the amounts here on Anders' ledger are denominated in dollars, not in Bitcoin, but the idea is the same. And remember, information can only flow in one direction on the blockchain. So if you try to remine this block, that's fixed. But this field for the hash of the previous block does not match the hash for the previous block. So the blockchain is broken. So to fix this, you would have to remine that to make it look valid. It wouldn't actually be valid because now this would be a fraudster trying to fix this blockchain. So you'd have to go back in time here to this block that is broken, redo that, and then redo all subsequent blocks in the blockchain. With 1 million nodes and miners looking on, the network would immediately see what was happening, because this is a publicly distributed ledger. Now we're going to go to a block structure that looks a little bit more like Bitcoin. Now, Anders is still using dollars denominating the transactions, but the idea is the same here. But we don't have any names here, just have an address here that identifies the person. Here we have a number, a public key that identifies the sender, and a public key that identifies the recipient of the money. And we have here a digital signature. And this is what I want you to focus on here, this digital signature and what this does. If a fraudster goes in here and tries to change this block, you see that it's invalid. And then let's say the fraudster reminds this block to try to make it look like a valid block. And we mind it when we have the correct number of zeros here. So it looks legit, except that look at this. This signature says this block is invalid. And the only way to fix that is to go back to the correct amount. All the data in this block has to be correct for that signature to work. So it now works because the amount has been corrected back to exactly what it was. Even if it's off by a penny, it's not going to work. Even if you remine it, it's not going to work. This signature is going to stay red. Now remember, what this signature is unique for each transaction. It's generated by the SHA-256 algorithm, and it's generated from the private key of the sender. The miner cannot get around that because the miner has no access to the private key code of the sender. So there's no way the miner can tamper with this transaction. And this works the same way back here. If you try to go back here and produce a fraudulent ledger, let's say we change this $20 to $200, well, not only does it render this block invalid, it renders all subsequent blocks invalid. And it doesn't do any good for the miner to redo the work for this block because of this digital signature right there. It won't work. You see that? This signature does not match that transaction, and the only way to get it to match is to put it back to the original amount, make the data in the block exactly the same until we remine that block. And then we'd have to put this data back here to the original amount, and we'd have to remine that, and you'd have to redo the work. So this is a pretty much ironclad defense against fraud. And this is a distributed ledger. Everybody has a copy of the same ledger that is distributed every 10 minutes on the Bitcoin network of more than 1 million miners and nodes. And so if anybody tries to submit a ledger that is different from the copy that everyone else has, the rest of the network would see that this ledger does not match the copy of the ledger that they have. So this ledger would be kicked out of the system as invalid. So that's pretty much how that works. It's important also to understand that there are actually two chains being built here. There's a chain of blocks and a chain of transactions. Transactions are linked to transactions. Blocks are linked to blocks. Blocks don't have anything to do with the validity of transactions. Blocks are just a convenient way for miners to batch transactions together in 10-minute time frames. A block is a container for a batch of transactions. Transactions are linked through digital signatures, the links also being hashes provided by SHA-256. Each new transaction must be linked to the entire history of transactions and traceable back to the very first transaction, because that's how you keep track of money. It's no different than when you are balancing your checkbook. Now let me show you one more thing that I think will be interesting. Anders has a tool on here that lets you generate private keys. So when I generate a private key here, look at how long that public key code is. If I generate a private key here, by hitting that button, it generates a random private key number. Remember, there's more possibilities for private keys with SHA-256 than there are atoms in the known universe. At least that's what they say. I don't know if that's true. I haven't actually counted the atoms in the universe, but that's what people say. That's why this is unbreakable code. And every time I generate a new private key, this public key changes. This also produces signatures for transactions or for messages. Transactions are messages. In digital world, the money is code. Money is a message. So let's say I put a message in here. Ben likes breakdancing. So I have a message. So I have a private key here. The SHA-256 will now generate a signature for this message, a message that could be money. It could be a money transaction. So it generates that signature, and we verify if this signature matches that message. It all has to match. The public key, the private key, the message signature, and the message all has to fit together. Or the transaction or the message gets thrown out of the system as invalid. So that's pretty cool, right? And here's a transaction. Let's say we have a $20 transaction here, and it's from this person, and it's to this person. I generate a signature from my private key. The SHA-256 algorithm does this, and there's the message signature. Look at that code there. Then I go over here, and I am the recipient of this money. I check it. It's verified, so I can get my $20. So that's one transaction. And in blockchain, the blocks have many transactions. In Bitcoin, a block can hold up to, I think, 3,000 or so transactions every 10 minutes. So that's how that works. And this is just one layer of Bitcoin's security structure. There are more layers. All right, cool. Now, blockchain technology can be used in a centralized way or a decentralized way. Banks use blockchain and SHA-256 cryptography to protect their systems. But the Bitcoin network is the only truly decentralized money network of any meaningful size. True decentralization is what makes Bitcoin unique. And it's a big part of what makes Bitcoin unconfiscatable money. Unconfiscatable because no one can print more of it, thus diluting the value of the money that you've earned. And unconfiscatable because no one can take your money without your 256-bit private key code. But also unconfiscatable because of its decentralized distributed structure, making Bitcoin difficult, and I would say impossible, for a hostile government to destroy. One of the pillars of Bitcoin's security structure is its proof-of-work mining system. Bitcoin mining is essential to Bitcoin's security and consensus structure. Bitcoin could not be a secure decentralized money network without Bitcoin miners. The job of Bitcoin miners is to validate and process transactions, protect the network, and keep the network running smoothly. As a financial incentive, the worldwide network of Bitcoin mining computers engage in a race to guess a number every 10 minutes. The number the computers must guess is supplied by the SHA-256 algorithm. The winner of this race receives a Bitcoin mining reward of 6.25 Bitcoins, plus transaction fees, plus the privilege of assembling the next block and inserting the block into the permanent blockchain. So that's quite a lot of money being paid to miners every 10 minutes. This is also how new Bitcoins enter circulation. In the early days of Bitcoin, when the network was small and the value of a Bitcoin was less than $1, Bitcoin mining could be conducted profitably with a $400 laptop computer. Now that the price of one Bitcoin is around $20,000, the race to guess this number every 10 minutes by more than 1 million mining computers is intense. Today, Bitcoin mining is conducted by powerful single-purpose mining computers called ASIC. ASIC. ASIC stands for Application-Specific Integrated Circuit. These computers can only be used for mining Bitcoin, because every watt of computing power must be harnessed to have the best chance to win the race to guess the number. And here's what a Bitcoin mining computer sounds like.
Here goes the Z9 Mini. And then we take a step over here. And we got our two E3 miners, and then we got an S9J and an S9.
This gives you an idea of how hard these computers are working to win the race to guess the number every 10 minutes. Now, a number that Bitcoin miners pay close attention to is called the hash rate. Hash rate is the number of guesses the network of mining computers must guess per second before one guesses the right number. Well, I just checked the current hash rate, and I see that the network is making 219 quintillion guesses per second. Now, this is a mind-bending number. How big a number is this? 219 quintillion guesses per second. Well, first think of 1 billion. Then think of 1 trillion. Then think of 1 quadrillion. Then think of a quintillion. 1 quintillion is 1 million times more than 1 trillion. And then it's 219 quintillion guesses per second that the combined computing power of the network is making to guess the right number to win the race for the 6.25 bitcoins, plus transaction fees. Now, some have criticized Bitcoin for its enormous use of electricity. The Bitcoin network uses more electricity than some small countries. I have an entire video linked above on why this is a misguided concern. The United States spends about $1 trillion a year on the military to secure our country, which is property. Not to mention all the money we spend on Homeland Security, the FBI, police, other law enforcement, courts, banking, and computer networks to secure our money and our property. We spend trillions and trillions of dollars to secure our property in the physical world. The currency of the digital world is computing power, which requires electricity. The more compute power you can deploy, the more secure your network. Attackers like China and Russia can deploy enormous compute power to launch attacks. Securing a $400 billion asset in the digital world requires brute force computing power. An alternative offered to proof of work is called proof of stake. The problem with proof of stake is that it's not at all secure. All proof of stake systems are also centralized. And in terms of securing a computer network, proof of stake is a joke compared to proof of work. In a proof of stake system, your votes on the network are in direct proportion to the number of coins you've staked. Instead of proof of work mining, proof of stake systems put new coins into circulation through a process called minting. The number of newly minted coins that you are awarded is in direct proportion to the number of coins that you own. So this incentivizes centralization, and also a kind of feudalistic economic structure, where the rich always get richer and gain more votes in governance of the network. It would be as if Elon Musk were getting the biggest checks from the government and being awarded the most votes in elections because he's the richest person. It makes no sense, and people wouldn't put up with it. Ethereum has transitioned from a proof of work system to a proof of stake system. Ethereum is about a $200 billion asset, about half the size of Bitcoin. Because no work is required to accumulate more coins in a proof of stake system, like Ethereum, and because newly minted coins are awarded in direct proportion to the number of coins that you have staked in the system, and because your votes in the system are also in direct proportion to the number of coins that you own, Elon Musk could easily just take over Ethereum in about 15 minutes by staking the most coins, as could China. In Bitcoin's decentralized proof-of-work system, those who hold the most coins have no more power over the network than those who hold just a fraction of a Bitcoin. In the Bitcoin system, votes are CPUs. A CPU is a central processing unit, a computer. One CPU computer equals one vote in the governance of the system. And coins are awarded in direct proportion to the amount of computing power expended to guess the number. That is, for the amount of work performed. Had Satoshi wanted to, he could have chosen a proof-of-stake system. He chose proof of work. Proof of work is far and away the most secure method of securing a computer network. It's not even close. And it's the only way to secure a truly decentralized computer network. So this is a key element of Bitcoin's security structure. This proof-of-work number guessing system was originally developed as a way to block spam attacks and denial-of-service attacks on computer networks. In a denial-of-service attack, the attacker bombards a computer network with gazillions of fake transactions or spam communications. This freezes the computer network. A denial of service attacker will often demand a ransom payment to call off the attack. What this proof of work number guessing function does is disproportionately increase the cost of attacking to the attacker. Proof of stake systems are highly vulnerable to denial of service attacks. In the Bitcoin network, there's also a difficulty adjustment that occurs every 2016 blocks, or about every 2 weeks, so that a new block of Bitcoin transactions is processed every 10 minutes on average. As more and more miners join the network, the difficulty of the number mining computers must guess increases in difficulty. So the more miners who join the Bitcoin network, the more secure it becomes, because the more difficult the proof of work number is to guess, so that the network stays on Satoshi's timetable of one new block of transactions mined and created every 10 minutes. Michael Saylor, the founder of MicroStrategy, describes Bitcoin as like an ever-growing nest of cyber hornets. The larger the nest and the larger the number of swarming hornets protecting the nest, the more difficult it becomes to attack the network. To disrupt the network in any serious way, an attacker must surmount an enormous wall of encrypted energy. Some observers have speculated that Bitcoin might be vulnerable to a 51% attack, because a consensus of just 51% of miners and nodes is required to validate blocks of transactions for insertion into the permanent blockchain. But this is really not a vulnerability. It's actually brilliant design by Satoshi. The reason only a 51% consensus is required to approve a block of transactions, rather than 100% or a supermajority, is to protect the network from a saboteur or a small group of saboteurs who might attack Bitcoin by maliciously blocking transactions and then holding the system hostage. In reality, legit transactions will be approved by 100% of the miners because the cryptography in the software has already verified that everything fits: the private key of the sender, the public key of the receiver, and the digital signature by the sender of the transaction. So every transaction that gets to the mempool of pending transactions has already been verified as legit. But then the network has to further validate the block of transactions in order to ensure that the miner assembling the transactions into the block hasn't engaged in any shenanigans. So it's like an extra step of verification. But a 51% could theoretically happen if 51% of miners, or more precisely 51% of the computing hash power, were to team up to maliciously attack the Bitcoin network by blocking legitimate transactions and bogging down the network, and potentially creating a double spend. Satoshi describes the system's defense against a potential 51% attack this way, quote, "Proof of work is essentially one CPU, one vote. The majority decision is represented by the longest chain, which has the greatest proof of work effort invested in it. If a majority of CPU power is controlled by honest nodes, the honest chain will grow the fastest and outpace any competing chains. To modify a past block, an attacker would have to redo the proof of work of the block and all blocks after it." End quote. This possibility was far more likely in the early days of Bitcoin, when the network of miners was small and the value of the coins was low. It would be very difficult today with more than 1 million nodes and miners spread out across the world to protect their coins that now cost $20,000 each to buy. Furthermore, a race to mine the next block is occurring every 10 minutes on average, with 1 million mining computers racing to solve a proof of work math puzzle for each block. To revise the ledger history, the attacker would need to win every race to solve the math puzzle for many blocks in succession, while simultaneously redoing the proof of work math puzzles for previous blocks in the blockchain. For this reason, it appears impossible for any attacker to change the immutable blockchain history. All that might happen is for the current block of transactions to be disrupted by a 51% attack. And a quick sidebar here. It's worth noting that Satoshi in his white paper did not distinguish between miners and nodes. Back then, it was possible to mine for Bitcoins with a standard $400 laptop computer. But as Bitcoin's price increased and more nodes joined the network to mine for Bitcoin, more powerful mining computers were needed for mining, the aforementioned single-purpose ASIC mining computers. These computers can only be used for Bitcoin mining and are quite expensive. A good one costs $7,000 to $15,000. Satoshi wanted validating nodes to be able to use a $400 computer so that as many people as possible could participate in block validation, thus keeping decentralization as a key pillar of the Bitcoin network's indestructibility. To preserve the Satoshi vision of decentralization, the Bitcoin community began talking about miners and nodes as separate categories. Miners process transactions and assemble blocks. Then validating nodes confirm the work of the miners. Now let's look some more on whether Bitcoin can be destroyed, which is always a nagging question. What if, let's say, China really decided to focus on destroying the Bitcoin network? And let's say China's regime is able to devote enough compute power to overwhelm this proof-of-work system. Bitcoin has safeguards against this possibility too. For reasons I've already covered, it seems unlikely that China would be able to undo the blockchain. That is, the past ledger history, because of the SHA-256 hashes, which is military-grade cryptography, the most secure cryptography ever developed, designed by the National Security Agency to secure our military's computer networks. But even if China were successful in redoing the proof of work for all these past blocks for its own copy of the ledger, China's version of the ledger would not match anybody else's ledger. So China's version of the ledger would be immediately spotted as invalid. However, it has been theorized that China might be able to freeze the Bitcoin network by deploying overwhelming compute power, thus allowing China to potentially build a fraudulent extension of the Bitcoin chain in secret, out of public view. China's version of the blockchain would then be the longest chain, and therefore considered the legitimate chain according to Satoshi's protocol. The longest chain is considered the legitimate chain because that chain represents the most work, the most computing power used to create it. So that's the presumption. However, because the Bitcoin network is transparent, the Bitcoin network would know exactly what was happening if any of this were to occur. And they would have two ways to counter this type of an attack by China. Counterattack strategy number one. It takes a 95% vote of miners in validating nodes to make any changes to Bitcoin. So a 95% vote could just cancel whatever China did. Counterattack strategy number two. Bitcoin developers could create what is called a hard fork in the blockchain. The market would then decide which is the honest chain and which is the fraudulent chain. The market would certainly follow the honest chain, not China's chain. And there have been a number of hard forks created in Bitcoin's history. And actually, it's no big deal. And sometimes hard forks don't involve fraud at all, but just involve honest disagreements about what Bitcoin should be. In 2017, there was a battle called the block size war. An early Bitcoiner and Silicon Valley venture capitalist named Roger Ver organized a faction of miners to lobby for larger block sizes. He wanted larger block sizes to accommodate more transactions, which would enable speedier transactions, because you could pack more transactions into a block every 10 minutes. Roger Ver and his group wanted the maximum block size to be 32 times bigger than the 1 megabyte outlined in Satoshi's white paper. The downside of this is that more powerful computers would be required to validate blocks of transactions. Many on the network would not be able to afford more expensive computers. Validating nodes would drop out of the network, and the network would become more centralized. So Roger Ver and his faction of developers and miners created a hard fork called Bitcoin Cash. Bitcoin Cash still exists, but it's less than 1% the size of Bitcoin in terms of market cap. And that's the most successful renegade hard fork in Bitcoin's history. Other hard forks include Bitcoin Classic, Bitcoin Unlimited, Bitcoin XT, Bitcoin SV, and there have been some others. And in fact, anyone can create a hard fork. It's no big deal. Bitcoin software is open source. Anyone can just copy it, make a few tweaks, and try to launch an improved version of Bitcoin. and many have tried. Then the market decides which chain to follow. So that's Bitcoin's ultimate defense. The market decides the true chain. In fact, there are more than 19,000 cryptocurrencies and assets out there. Many attempted to try to improve Bitcoin, but only a few have any meaningful following. In fact, almost all of them failed miserably. Bitcoin continues to be the King Kong of digital money. Bitcoin is just a sprawling network that's governed by an automated software protocol in cyberspace. Bitcoin is governed by math and automated algorithms. So Bitcoin effectively just runs itself. China found this out in the summer of 2020 when it tried to outlaw Bitcoin. China issued a ban on Bitcoin mining and Bitcoin transactions. Bitcoin miners then left China for more hospitable countries and started mining again. At one point, about 60% of the Bitcoin mining in the world was done in China. And that went down to pretty close to zero after China's crackdown on Bitcoin miners. But now, Bitcoin mining has started coming back again in China. Today, about 20% of the world's Bitcoin mining is happening in China. So it appears China's regime is either unable to ban Bitcoin mining or just isn't expending the resources and effort to ban it anymore. To ban Bitcoin, you'd have to ban the internet, and you'd have to ban computers. Bitcoin is often criticized as too inflexible, too rigid, and too resistant to change. A 95% vote of the global network of more than 1 million miners and nodes is required to make any changes to the system. There have been changes to Bitcoin. Sometimes changes in the form of upgrades are approved, but not often. Anyone can propose improvements. Changes take years to be approved because of this 95% super consensus needed to enact an adjustment or an upgrade or any change to Bitcoin. The two big ones that have been approved are the Taproot upgrade, which occurred in 2021, and the segregated witness upgrade that occurred in 2017. So upgrades and changes to Bitcoin are possible, but must be clearly in the interest of just about everyone on the network to be approved. I believe Bitcoin's stability is its strength, is in fact what makes Bitcoin valuable. Honest money is supposed to be something you can count on. Honest money should be rigid, should be inflexible. Money is supposed to be a unit of measurement, a way to measure value. Imagine if centimeters or inches kept changing. If units of measurement kept changing, we would not have engineering. We couldn't build skyscrapers and bridges. We couldn't have rockets, aircraft, or automobiles. We could not have a modern society because we would all be living in mud huts. Units of measurement must be fixed. We are paid money in proportion to the amount of value that we provide to someone at some point for our work. Honest money should allow us to store this value so we can use it at some point in the future when we need it. We don't want our money to be like a leaky boat that might or might not take us to the other side of the lake. Bitcoin is like the sun. We know exactly what time the sun will rise this day next year, or this day 1,000 years from now. That's what Bitcoin is, stable, like the sun. Bitcoin is like the North Star. We always know exactly where the North Star will be. For me, Bitcoin is insurance against political system and economic collapse. If all hell breaks loose here, Bitcoin allows me to carry a good chunk of my assets with me and move quickly to wherever civilization might still exist in some form. That's what Bitcoin is for me. It's insurance. It is true that Bitcoin is a bit slow and clunky. Bitcoin is built for security, not so much for speed. It might take 10 minutes or even 20 minutes to complete a transaction on the Bitcoin network. And that's fine for substantial sums of money, $1,000 or more. Bitcoin is built to protect wealth. Bitcoin is designed to be indestructible, unconfiscatable money. Bitcoin is not so good for buying a cup of coffee at Starbucks. But Bitcoin developers have come up with a solution for this, and it's called the Lightning Network. The Lightning Network is being built on top of Bitcoin as a Layer 2 solution. Transactions on Lightning are instant and free, or almost free. Bitcoin is Fort Knox in the digital realm. When moving sizable sums of money, people don't mind waiting an extra few minutes to complete the transaction. Bank wire transfers are not quick either. They take several hours, or even days if you're trying to wire money overseas. Lightning is less secure than Bitcoin. It's not even blockchain. But transactions are instant and free or almost free. Lightning is what you use to buy your cups of coffee, and for daily use. Your physical wallet isn't that secure either. I lose mine quite regularly. It's a pain when I lose it, but it's not a disaster. Bitcoin is where you store your wealth. Lightning is for daily use. There's always a trade-off between security and speed. If you want maximum security, you lose speed. If you want instant transactions, you lose security. Gold used to be the base layer for the dollar. Paper money was created because paper is easier to use than gold. U.S. paper money used to be gold certificates. You could actually show up at a bank with your paper dollars and exchange your paper for gold coins. That ended in 1933. Then the U.S. went off the gold standard completely in 1971 and became a government fiat money printing system, with the value of the dollar tied to nothing. Bitcoin is often called digital gold. Bitcoin is the base layer for the much faster Lightning Network, as well as for other applications that are now being built on Bitcoin. It's worth noting that credit card transactions are not really speedy either. Even though your credit card purchase is usually honored immediately, it can often take days for credit card transactions to settle. And that's the main advantage of a centralized system. A centralized system like Visa can provisionally approve transactions quickly and then wait for final settlement. Credit card transactions are actually not considered final for 30 days, 60 days, or even longer. Chargebacks can happen at any time. So credit card transactions are not speedy at all for the merchant. A Visa credit card transaction is never final for the merchant. Visa can always go into the merchant's bank account and retrieve the money. Visa is the referee and can intervene at any time, take your money, freeze your account, and effectively shut down your business. Once a Bitcoin transaction is verified by the network of miners and accepted by the payee, there are no chargebacks, no reversing of transactions, unless both agree to reverse the payment. The one who is paid on the Bitcoin system can always return the money, but that decision is between the two parties. With Bitcoin, your account can't be frozen or canceled. Your payments cannot be intercepted or stopped. All right, let's talk a little bit more about Bitcoin's fixed supply and something called halving events. As we've seen, Bitcoin mining is how new Bitcoins are created and enter circulation, enter the system. As of now, 6.25 new Bitcoins are mined or created about every 10 minutes, through that race among miners to guess a number that we just talked about. The winner of this race gets the 6.25 Bitcoin mining reward plus transaction fees. This incentivizes miners to protect the network, because that protects their own Bitcoin, which they are working so hard to accumulate. So about 900 new Bitcoins are mined and put into circulation through this process called mining every day. But Bitcoin's supply is cut in half every 210,000 blocks, which is about once every 4 years. The last halving was in May of 2020, when the Bitcoin mining reward for the winning miner was cut from 12.5 Bitcoins to 6.25 Bitcoins. But this doesn't bother the miners because the price of one Bitcoin at that time, at the time of the last halving, was around $9,000. Today, in October of 2022, 2.5 years later, Bitcoin's price is hovering in the $20,000 area. The next halving event will be in May of 2024, when the Bitcoin mining reward will be cut from 6.25 Bitcoins to 3.12, or about 450 new Bitcoins mined or created each day, until the next halving, which is in 2028, when the supply of Bitcoin will be cut in half again, to 225 Bitcoins per day, with a block mining reward of 1.56 Bitcoins. But the miners won't be too upset their reward is being cut in half, at least in Bitcoin terms, because by then the price of one Bitcoin should be much higher than it is now. Hopefully at least 5 times higher, and perhaps much higher if adoption continues to grow at current trend lines. The final 21 millionth Bitcoin will be mined in the spring of 2140, or about 118 years from now. At this point, the block reward subsidy for miners will stop, because by this point, transaction fees alone should be enough incentive for the miners, because by that time, Bitcoin quite possibly will be the money of the world, will be the world's reserve currency. At least that's my bet, because Bitcoin is clearly superior money. About 19.1 million Bitcoins have been mined so far, so just 1.9 million Bitcoins are left to be mined.
Now we keep hearing that Bitcoin is too slow, too expensive, and not practical for daily use. And to some extent that's true, if we're just talking about the Bitcoin base layer, because Bitcoin is built primarily for security, not so much for speed. Security is Bitcoin's #1 priority. But now let's look at Bitcoin's transaction fees. Let's get into some of these blocks here. If you go over here to blockchain.com, and if you click on this hash link, we'll enter the block. This is a block of transactions, block number 758,461. We see some transactions here. So here's the first transaction in this block. This is what's called the Coinbase transaction. This is where the winning miner gets his 6.25 Bitcoin mining reward, plus transaction fees. So a total of 6.33 Bitcoins for the work that he did for winning the race to guess the number. So that totals here $118,356 for the miner. So what also happened here is 6.25 Bitcoins were created or mined and enter into circulation. So you see that here in this first transaction in this block. There are no fees for this transaction because this is the Coinbase transaction for this block. So now let's go down the list here to look at transactions by Bitcoin users and see what fees they paid. This is a transaction for 0.28 Bitcoins, which is $5,247.76. And we see here a transaction fee of $9.34. So that's less than 0.2% for the transaction fee. Also, with Bitcoin, you set your own transaction fee. There is a default amount, but if you want your transaction to go through quicker, you can set a higher fee. In fact, with Bitcoin, you can set your transaction fee to 0 if you don't mind waiting for a while. Miners, of course, prioritize transactions that have the highest fees. But you can set the fee to 0. And the miners will get to it because the main prize here is a 6.25 Bitcoin mining reward. So here we have a transaction of $120,253. And we have a transaction fee of just $6.92. Now, you wouldn't want to be paying these transaction fees for buying your cups of coffee at Starbucks. Plus, it takes 10 or 20 minutes for your transaction to go through. So it's not that good for buying your coffee at Starbucks or 7-Eleven. That is, if you're operating directly from the blockchain. But operating from the base layer wouldn't be quick if you were trying to pay in gold either, which used to be the base layer for the dollar. So what you want to use to buy your cups of coffee and your daily transactions is Lightning. All you have to do is load a bit of Bitcoin into Lightning, and your transactions are free, or almost free. And your transactions are instant. Everything is faster and cheaper with Bitcoin.
Okay, so now you have a pretty good overview of Bitcoin, its history, and reason for being. So now you might be saying to yourself, okay, awesome. So how do I actually get some Bitcoin? How do I start using it? Well, the first thing you need to do is set up an account on an exchange like Coinbase, Coinbase.com. I use Coinbase to buy my Bitcoin. Now, Coinbase is a centrally run exchange. It operates pretty similar to E-Trade. You just go there, sign up, and start buying Bitcoin. So it's super easy. Coinbase is a U.S. company. It's publicly traded and regulated by the SEC. It abides by Know Your Customer rules. So they will ask you to confirm your identity by showing them a copy of your driver's license or passport. You take a photo of that, then use their interface to upload it to them. You then link your bank account to your Coinbase account, and you're ready to go. But please don't stop there. You don't want to leave your Bitcoin on Coinbase or any centrally administered exchange. Leaving your Bitcoin on a centrally administered exchange almost defeats the entire point of Bitcoin. If you leave your Bitcoin on Coinbase, it could be seized by the IRS or any agency of government. It could be seized or frozen if you're in a civil lawsuit. In addition, something might happen to Coinbase. They might go out of business. Or someone at Coinbase might be a crook and grab your Bitcoin. I don't think that will happen. But you introduce third-party risk by leaving your Bitcoin on a centrally run exchange like Coinbase. In Bitcoin world, the rule is not your keys, not your coins. If you buy Bitcoin through Coinbase, you are buying with Coinbase's keys and storing them on a Coinbase address. What you want to do is get your own Bitcoin keys and transfer your Bitcoin from Coinbase to your keys that you own and control. How do you do this? Well, you need a wallet. And there are two types of wallets. The one that you download onto your phone or your computer is connected to the internet. This is called a hot wallet. The second type of wallet is called a cold storage hardware wallet that can connect to your computer with a USB drive, but that you disconnect when you're not using it. A wallet on your phone or computer device that's connected to the internet will not be as secure as a cold storage hardware wallet that's not connected to the internet. Or at least it's not connected to the internet 99.99% of the time. The hot wallet that I use for my phone is called Electrum. I like it. And here's their website. And here's what the interface looks like. Other good wallets are Blue Wallet, Moon Wallet, and Mycelium. I haven't used these, but a lot of Bitcoiners use them. Like Electrum, these are hot wallets that you download on your phone. Head on over to bitcoin.org to read up on what's the best wallet for you. Then download from there. Bitcoin.org will steer you to a good wallet. And I've included links to all of this below. The other category of wallet is a cold storage hardware wallet, not connected to the internet, unless I decide to connect it via USB. But 99.9% of the time, my hardware wallet is nowhere near the internet. I use Treasure for my hardware cold storage. A lot of Bitcoiners use Ledger and KeepKey. And I have multiple hardware wallets and multiple Bitcoin addresses. So if I ever lose one of my hardware wallets or it's stolen, I can quickly move my Bitcoin to another address. I keep my seed word recovery phrases in secure physical locations. And it will take a thief some time to break through the security of my cold storage Treasure hardware wallet, which includes two-factor identity authentication. I use my phone-installed hot wallet, Electrum, in much the same way I use my physical wallet, for small amounts of money, not for my life savings. When you're just starting to buy your first fraction of a Bitcoin, you want to start with small amounts, perhaps $100 or so, just to get used to the process and how these wallets work. You learn by doing. So if you screw up, such as lose your private key, it's just a small amount. So once you've downloaded Electrum, Moon, Blue Wallet, or other Bitcoin wallet, just follow the step-by-step instructions. The wallet helps you generate your private and public keys, as well as your seed word recovery phrase, in case you lose your private key code. You can also use a cold storage hardware wallet to generate your keys offline. And always buy your cold storage hardware wallet directly from the manufacturer, not from a third party, not from Amazon or eBay. Never buy a used cold storage hardware wallet. When your cold storage hardware wallet arrives from the manufacturer, make sure the seal on the package isn't broken. You want your wallet to be pristine, new, and directly from the manufacturer. Remember, in Bitcoin world, you are your own bank, but that requires taking personal responsibility for securing your Bitcoin, which means securing your private keys. You can also buy Bitcoin with Cash App. Cash App is a product of Jack Dorsey's Square, now renamed Block. Jack Dorsey founded both Twitter and Square. Jack quit as CEO of Twitter in 2020. He says to devote his life to making Bitcoin available to the unbanked of the world.
Money is a foundational layer that enables so much more. I was meeting with an entrepreneur in Ethiopia, and payments is probably the number one problem to solve across the continent. both in terms of moving money across borders between nations on the continent, or the amount of corruption within the current system. But the lack of easy ways to pay people makes starting anything really difficult. I met an entrepreneur who started the Lyft/Uber of Ethiopia, and one of the biggest problems she has is that it's not easy for her riders to pay the company, and it's not easy for her to pay the drivers.
Bitcoin is now the preferred currency in much of Africa, Latin America, Asia, and the Third World. What's it worth to provide a stable money system to these people? To people in the Third World who have never had a bank account and who have never had access to money. So Cash App is centrally owned. It's not decentralized. It's Jack Dorsey's company. But Cash App allows you to buy Bitcoin and move it off the app to your own address. Dorsey is committed to the Bitcoin principle of decentralized, unconfiscatable money. And one more note about generating your private keys. You actually don't have to use your commercial wallets to generate your private keys. Some hardcore Bitcoiners prefer to generate their own keys without ever coming into contact with the internet and without a computer device. Remember, your cold storage hardware wallet is connected to your computer and the internet via USB drive for brief periods when you're using it, though you disconnect your cold storage device when not using it. And they include multi-factor identity authentication, so I believe they're secure. Cold storage hardware wallets are in the business of security, after all. That's their entire business. These are substantial companies, and these devices only contain single-purpose software, the entire purpose of which is security. No other software can run on these devices. It's not like your laptop computer that has all kinds of apps and is connected to the internet. However, you can take security to another level. You can even generate your private key by flipping a coin 256 times and recording the result of each flip, hence SHA-256. 256 bits refers to binary numbers, ones and zeros. So 256 coin flips will produce a private key code. You can also use dice or a scientific calculator to create your private key. Your private key is then used to generate your public key. And there are other offline tools that you can use to generate your private key code. Now here's the next level. What I consider to be my life savings is stored at a unique address imprinted on titanium plates and buried in the ground. This wallet can survive fire, flood, and nuclear war. And I'll do an entire video with more detail on how to store and secure your Bitcoin. I left out a lot of detail on this video, but I think I've hit most of the key elements that you should know before you launch in. You can dive very deeply into this rabbit hole called Bitcoin. Hopefully what I've outlined here will help get you started. Again, if you find this video useful, please hit the like, subscribe, and notifications buttons. Share this video with some friends. And grab a copy of my book on Bitcoin over on Amazon. Also, follow me on Twitter. You'll find links to all of this below. Have a great day, and hope to see you back here for the next video.